This is a question from Oliver Hale 85, who asks, is there a risk of a Conservative Reform coalition?
Oh, begging the question there, would that be risky? Freddie, kick us off.
Two ways of interpreting this question. Is there going to be an electoral pact between the Conservative Party and the Reform Party before the next election? Is Nigel Farage going to join the Conservatives? Are they going to stand down? What's going to happen there? The second way of interpreting it is there going to be a coalition after the general election where they become a single government?
All right, so, let's take number one first.
Number one, potentially. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen at all. Reform have been quite bullish and clear. Richard Tice's favourite thing is to say that he wants to destroy and decimate the Tory Party. So I think they can sort of foresee, or they hope that they can foresee, the collapse of the Tory Party and they become this centre-right party. I don't think that's going to happen either, but they've been quite clear that they need to separate the two out. Then from the Conservative perspective, I think many people in the party actually would be quite happy for Nigel Farage to join, and Liz Truss came out yet again this week to say that he should join. He's not yet said that. I think he's standing back and absorbing the fun and the speculation while he waits and sees what happens.
Rachel, you're hanging out with the Tories down at Westminster.
I'm the Reform and Tory whisperer, yes.
You are. How worried are the Conservative Party about reform?
I think some MPs are really worried, particularly MPs in seats that have had high Brexit votes in 2016, the so-called red wall seats, and they're not worried that Reform will win the seats. They're worried that Reform will split the vote, split what they see as their vote. Richard Tice would say it's not their vote, but we'll split the vote and allow Labour to edge ahead. And so a lot of seats are marginals, but a lot of seats that wouldn't be marginals now look a bit more marginal. And they're looking at Blackpool South, the by-election that we're having next week. In particular, Scott Benton, who was the MP, who has been forced to leave Parliament due to a lobbying scandal, he's got a majority of about 3,500. That's an area where Reform should do very well. The Conservatives are expecting to lose that seat to Labour anyway, but how well Reform do in that by-election will give them an idea of how worried that they ought to be. On the question of will Nigel Farage come and join the Tory Party? There's nothing really in it for him to join the Tory Party now. Like, they're going to lose. He's enjoying all of the attention. He's enjoying the fact that panicked Tories are suggesting possibly that he might be the solution. At Tory Party conference in October and also at the launch of Liz Truss's Popular Conservatism movement, Nigel Farage was there in his capacity from GB News. And like Freddie, you were there too. He had like a fan club around him.
Yeah, he was like the guest speaker on a cruise ship.
Yeah, he was. He was the sort of a celebrity at those events. But there's nothing in it for him to join a party that is obviously going to lose. And as Freddie said, like, Richard Tice has been really, really clear that he just wants to do as much damage to the Tories as possible. What happens after that is more interesting. I've talked to Conservatives who think there will have to be some kind of merger or way to bring the sort of reform movement back within the Conservative Party. I've spoken to others who say, come on, these guys aren't going to get any seats at all. Why are we even bothering about them? And who are worried about how many votes they would lose on the moderate centrist sort of wing of the party if they were to do that. So it's definitely an active conversation, but I don't think it's an active conversation for this coming election.
It's going to happen after.
Yeah.
And do you see that likely that sort of rightward lurch from whatever survives of the Conservative Party after the election? I
think it depends a lot on how well Reform do. If you speak to any pollster, they will say that Reform's headline vote support at the moment, which is about like between 10 and 13%, that doesn't seem to be matched in elections that they've actually run in. They did achieve that in Wellingborough earlier this year, but that was an area where you would expect them to do much higher if that was their national support level. So it depends, can they actually turn that into results? We'll get an idea of that at the locals. Although they're only standing in, I think, a third of council seats. They're not standing everywhere. It's a conversation, and I think there are as many people in the Tory party who are quite worried about what the party would look like if it did turn too far in that direction, as there are who are saying we have to find a way to neutralise this, otherwise we won't come back. I was speaking to one Tory strategist earlier this week who pointed out that the reason the Conservative Party has been such a successful electoral machine over the decades is because it has managed to unite a lot of different groups on the right, whereas the left has been quite split between Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, other groups. And if that advantage starts to look less strong, that could really spell trouble for the party in the future.
Just looking beyond the election, is there going to be this nationalist consolidation on the right? I think there will be. We're seeing that in Europe. We're seeing that with Trump polling quite well at the moment. So I do think it depends on how the Conservatives do at the election. But broadly, is that going to happen in some form, whether it's a technical merger or whether it's just like the merger of ideas? Does the Conservative Party co-opt all the ideas of Reform or UKIP or the Brexit Party or whatever you want to call it? Well, they're already sort of halfway down that path. And I think immigration is reasserting itself as an issue in politics now. Right now, I think the high numbers that we've had coming in the past 2 years will only accelerate that process. And then, if we look ahead, I think it'll be a huge problem for Labour if they do have a unified nationalist right at the election after this one.
But taking what you're saying there and what we were talking about together with George and Labour's plans to effectively nationalise the railways in their first term, it could be, couldn't it, that this is the biggest difference we've seen between the two main parties for quite some time, what we end up with post-election?
Well, maybe. I mean, there was a much greater difference when Liz Truss was in power.
Briefly. 49 days. But
it was very exciting. It was one of the two best PMQs I've been to. So, yeah, there might be some difference. I mean, let's see. We don't know where the Conservative Party is going. I think the Conservative Party will potentially make everything about culture, immigration, sense of identity, nationalism. And I think that will be very tricky for Keir Starmer, especially if they just sort of go along with the economic consensus, and also if we see some economic progress, people are looking elsewhere, the cost of living deprioritises for voters, and they look elsewhere. And I think that will be a completely different political scene.
On the second part of the question, or the second way of interpreting it, will there be a sort of formal coalition? You'd only get that if Reform won a number of seats. Currently, they have one MP, Lee Anderson. I think actually a really interesting thing to watch is the personal relationship between Lee Anderson and Nigel Farage. Both have shows on GB News. Both are used to being stars in their own right. So how that dynamic works when he's the only Reform MP, I think will be quite interesting to watch. But nobody is expecting Reform to win very many seats, any seats, you could say. And so under this voting system, that just isn't going to happen. But one of Reform's longer term aims is voting reform, is to get proportional representation. And so in the future, several parliaments down the road, if they succeeded in that, if they united with the Lib Dems and the Greens and managed to push through voting reform under Labour, which is one of their aims, could you see an election where we have proportional representation and the Conservatives and Reform won a number of seats under that and decided to go into government together? Yeah, I think that is the long-term aim. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.